We are live.
All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Design for Liberation with Terresa Moses. As a part of our first ever Midwest Design Week, my name is Ashton Spann, and I volunteer as co-vice president for AIGA Cincinnati, one of the 70+ chapters at AIGA, the professional organization for design. This week, we've had a really exciting lineup of events that focus on our theme of culture in its many forms, including tonight's keynote. Now I would like to go ahead and introduce tonight's keynote presenter, Terresa Moses. Terresa is a proud Black queer woman dedicated to the liberation of Black and Brown people through art and design. As a designer and illustrator, her work focuses on race, identity, and social justice. She advocates for positive change in her community using creativity as tools of activism, like her recent solo exhibition, Umbra. Terresa is the creative director at Blackbird Revolt, a social justice-based design studio. She is also an assistant professor of graphic design at the University of Minnesota's College of Design and the director of their College of Design's Justice Network. Her design research includes Project Natural, which creates spaces to educate, connect, and empower Black women about their natural hair and self-identity, and Racism Untaught, a curriculum model that reveals radicalized design and helps students, educators, and organizations create anti-racist concepts through design research process. And without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Terresa to go ahead and get started with her presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I am going to go ahead and get this presentation up for y'all. There we go. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you all about designing for liberation. You know, like we already said, I'm going to be talking about racialized systems and then how I use design. Hopefully that inspires you all, and I'll give you some few tips along the way. Before I get started though with this presentation, I would like to first acknowledge the land that I am standing on. And I encourage you all to, there are resources through the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture and also some really amazing resources throughout, the nets to find out what land you're standing on. So I just would like to acknowledge, what has been buried by honoring the truth, because it's critical in building connection across barriers of heritage. So just let's take a moment then to just consider how many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge that I reside on land that was cared for and called home by the Dakota people and other Native peoples from time immemorial. Seated in 1837 and 1851 treaties, this land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native nations, and peoples of this region. I continually support and advocate through my community organizing for the sovereignty of the Native nations in this territory and beyond. And I am here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Also, while we're acknowledging stolen land, I think it's important to bring to the conversation stolen people and the oppression that we continuously live through every day. This has been, the decision with Breonna Taylor has been weighing really heavily on me. And I just know that it's weighing heavily on people that are listening to me right now. And so I am opening this, this space up just with a quote from Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. And she says, "Say her name attempts to make the death of Black women an active part of this conversation by saying their names. If Black lives really do matter, all Black lives have to matter. That means Black lives across gender have to be lifted up." And again, I just want to just leave space. I know that, it's weighing on folks. And so, I'll be talking about, Blackness throughout this whole presentation. And I just wanted to open up by recognizing all of the lives that continually are lost to oppression and racism. So again, a quick introduction about me. My name is Terresa. I also go by Tara, use she, her pronouns. I am queer. I am a woman. I am a survivor of domestic and sexual violence. I'm a community organizer and activist. And also I am blackity black, okay? I like to open up any talks or keynotes that I do with the identities that I hold, because I don't think that we do it enough in the design room. As designers, I think it's important to bring our identities to the table, understand how our identities, how our traumas, how our experiences inform how we show up, and how we oppress and perpetuate harm, and then how we can uplift and support our communities. So again, I'm going to be centering Blackness throughout this presentation today, unapologetically, with all of its intersections. And if you are feeling a bit of discomfort around that, I invite you to explore that with allies at another time. So really quickly about me, I am a community organizer and an activist. I am a business owner through Blackbird Revolt with my partner here, Jordan Moses. I am an educator and the Director of Design Justice for the College of Design at the University of Minnesota. And on my free time, I am a PhD candidate in social justice education at the University of Toronto. More about me is that within this social change ecosystem, it's a model created by Deepa Iyer. I had redesigned it for many purposes that I do when I do workshops, but I like to stress that, we all want to show up in this conversation around social justice. We all have that, especially when you first wake up to it, you're like, what can I do? What's my role? All that. I encourage you all to look up the social change ecosystem. If I'm not mistaken, those links are going to be made available to you if they're not already. And so within this social change ecosystem, I just want to show folks where I lie. And as a designer, oftentimes folks want to go to, oh, you're probably a storyteller. And that's not necessarily the case, because you can show up as a designer in all of these different areas. For me, my work shows up as a builder and a disruptor. Okay, so that introspective work is super, super important as you move into conversations and actual action around liberation. And so those are the ways in which I show up, and you will see that as I bring out examples of how I'm weaving together community and systems, building up new things, and then also disrupting by being very frank and open about racism. So liberation is the act of setting someone free, right? Or I would even go as far to say within this conversation, being free. So when we talk about designing for liberation, it's actually creating artifacts, systems, and experiences in which folks can live freely. I've structured today, when I talk about liberation, I've structured today within three categories. These are not the only categories. There are many ways to liberation, and I am not the only voice who has been talking about this. And so the three categories that I'll be talking about today, though, are abolition, reparations, and design. Okay, these are three areas that I'll be discussing as I talk about our ways to move toward creating a place where we can all live free, right? Liberation. So first is abolition. Being an abolitionist is not new whatsoever. Right now, yes, it's getting a lot of mainstream media, attention, but it's definitely not a new concept. And I think as designers, of all people, creative people, we should be comfortable in dismantling those systems, right? We should be comfortable in completely destroying the system and making something that's new. And that requires us to get rid of it, right? Get rid of the old one. So abolition really, in its very short definition, is just to end something. And so we have to be comfortable doing that. And then not only just ending it, but creating something new. So when I think about abolition, I think about it in three major categories: disrupting the current system, right? In most cases, destroying it altogether. I think about, secondly, dismantling the power structures. And then third, shifting power, money, resources, access, all the things that we need to get moving and getting people out of the way so we can actually move forward. I want to start abolition talking about, a quote here. It says, "Becoming an abolitionist is a constant commitment. It is the acknowledgement that our societal institutions are still reliant upon the ideas, functions, and frameworks of slavery." So by reading that quote, and this is from a zine that we have created, Blackbird Revolt created. This is language created by Jordan, but reading that definition, if you are not an abolitionist yet, why are you not? If we know that there are societal institutions that exist that are still heavily reliant on the frameworks of slavery, why do we find that it's okay for us to support that? And again, I'll talk more about this, but design, it is designed that way, right? And so if you are interested, I just want to bring this resource out to you. If you are interested in like, what can I do? What is abolition? All those things. Blackboard Revolt, we created a zine this summer, again, a way for us to kind of decompress what was happening, especially being here in Minnesota. But we created this zine. It's called Opera. It is free to download. It's free to order, except you will pay shipping because we are giving those checks to USPS. But you can feel free to download this zine. It goes through some steps about, what you can do to help support the movement. But abolition is one of our points that we make within the zine. So further talk about abolition. So when we talk about abolition, or when we talk about design, we talk about problem solving, right? And problem solving is through, we have to design and problem solve through our own lens of experience, right? What are we recognizing as problems? What are we willing to actually center Blackness within those processes? A few of the things that I think about when I think about abolition is I think about, one, as a community organizer, what are we doing around the abolition of police and prisons, right? How are we reimagining safety and rehabilitation as it looks for our communities? Second, I think about industry hiring practice. So I'm thinking about in the lens of me as a designer now, right? Are we asking the right questions? Are we really focused on, is this person really qualified enough? Things like that. What are we really focusing on as far as us being a designer? Are we asking the right questions to get people in our rooms that we need to be in the design room? Are we supporting BIPOC employees? By my last count, design industry is still over 80% white. And so are we making sure that the BIPOC employees that we do have supportive systems? Okay. And then just a little nugget that you can take with you: stop asking for lists for BIPOC folks. Build relationships. Okay, so I want to offer you something else, invite you to do something else, which is building relationships with different communities. Thirdly, when I think about what we need to be abolishing, education. And I say that I am a professor. I know, why am I saying this? And I think that, if you are a designer, you should be critically thinking about, all of these systems. When I think about education, which is the ways that we learn, what are the ways that we actually do get to learn within these spaces? Who gets access to those spaces? What are they learning? What is actually in the books? How are we grading? How are we analyzing how critically someone understands an issue? Are we creating spaces of vulnerability, or are we just experts in the room who talk down to our students? What are the histories and ideologies that we're bringing to the classes? So when I think about, a system that needs to be really restructured, if not destroyed, I think about education. And then lastly, when I think about, this goes across industry, this goes across education, this goes across organizations, everything is like that diversity, equity, and inclusion position, right? So when I think about, when folks want to actually have change happen within their institution, oftentimes it's like, let's hire this one person who does this one work. And a saying that goes around, our whole campus all the time is that this is everyone's work all the time. And I want folks to understand that as a designer, you can begin to ask questions that will begin to shift culture within your institution. So start asking those questions, because it's everyone's work all the time. So one way in which I, am moving forward the agenda of abolition within, these institutions and these systems that oppress Black people is, through marches and protests. That is something that I enjoy being a part of as far as the organizing, and then also the design aspect. I will say though, when I, go and I start to design or create something for a march or a protest or some type of advocacy, I make sure that I'm involved in the organizing first. Oftentimes what we do as designers is we come in and we pull out our resume and we're saying I know how to lay out type, you should have me do your program for fundraising, whatever. And really, we're not building those relationships that are necessary to build trust within the community before we start saying, we have something to offer. So I will say that to make sure that we are building those relationships, but it's something that, after building relationships for years, being able to come in and say, yes, I'm going to help create the buttons that say defund police or say stop killing Black people. Absolutely, I'll be able to do that because I built those relationships. And I'm not only doing the design, but I'm helping with the organizing. I think people think that they're two separate things. Like you just are going to get, get your list of things that the community organizer needs, and the organization most likely doesn't know what it needs. It knows what it wants as far as like policy change. So you're gonna have to go in there and do a little bit more legwork, but it's so rewarding in the end. And you can be super creative. Like here, you'll see like all of the type and whatnot, but these are brand new chants. So we, raised funds to be able to hire Sandra Oyunleye. She's in Duluth now. She's an amazing poet, but we hired her to create new chants. And so that is a way for us to hear young Black voices within the movement as well. And then using design to help give access to folks to be able to say those chants with us. And as part of the organizing team, this was the largest turnout for a march and protest in Duluth, Minnesota for anti-racism. And that was awesome to see that, to be a part of that, as an organizer and a designer. And then when I think about abolition, I think about communicating hard messages. And you see here in this image, you'll see that, I'm talking about white supremacy. How do we begin to communicate hard truths? How do we begin to communicate hard realities to people so that we can begin bringing awareness and then making a difference? And so here, we did the MLK, Black Revolt did the MLK branding every year. And this one was called The Current Crisis in Race Relations, which is named after an MLK speech. And so we talked about, we made white supremacy be representative of this like orange, wave that like ends up having like this hand that pulls all of us down. And that's what the imagery was showing. So, how can we creatively use design to tell those messages? But again, like I like to show the picture of me with the UMD NAACP, the University of Minnesota Duluth NAACP chapter at the time, to show that I'm, again, not only removed, I'm not like removed as a designer, I am completely in the organizing as an actual community member, and then offering, these design skills on the side. So we like to do things in triptychs as Blackbird Revolt. And one of the things we did was created a triptych talking about white supremacy. So like it pulls everyone down. You'll see in the first image. In the second image, and you start to see that if you come together, that white supremacy begins to like lose its grasp, right? And then the third imagery is everyone kind of coming together, knowing what we're fighting for, and white supremacy gets to leave even further. So you see less of that orange color within that third image. Okay. And then again, like I said, not only am I doing this design part, because we actually, we have to find ways of funding us as Blackbird Revolt. So this is part of a fundraiser, is these like beautifully screen printed posters, but then organizing the rally itself. Again, one of the biggest rally, MLK rally in the area with over 2,500 people. So that's abolition. Let's move on to our next topic, reparations. When I think about, reparations, I think about joy. That's why I use this photo here in the background, I think about, being able to be fully restored. And so here's a quote here: our three elements of reparations, acknowledgement, intervention, and restoration, help hold us to our vision of Black liberation. And this is from Black Liberation Lab, which is an organization that Blackbird Revolt is a community partner with, and they're doing some amazing things. I would beg you to go check them out, donate if you're able to their causes. But when I think about reparations, I think about it in 4 different areas. I think about the number one thing I think everyone thinks about is finances, right? So financial and tangible resources, and we live in a capitalist society. So yes, if we're going to make change, that does require money. We need to compensate people for their time, right? What I think is the most important thing to bring out in this is that I don't not only want to compensate people for their time, but I want to do that without strings attached. Okay, so that's one thing, financial and tangible resources. Secondly, protection and healing. So when I think about the decision from Breonna Taylor, right, the number one priority should be the protection of Black lives, right? However, what we've seen now, and we continue to see within these conversations about Black Lives Matter, is that property is worth more than Black people. right? And so whenever we're talking about centering Black people, how are we protecting them? And how are we allowing them to heal from the re-traumatization that happens every single day, right? The third point I think about is accountability. It makes no sense for us to do all this healing, to do all these, like, let's give over resources. And then if we don't have anything to hold our individuals, organizations, and our government and our community accountable through accountability practices. And then lastly, I think about validation. Okay, I think about the validation for Black people, Black women, because there is so much racial gaslighting happening out there. People trying to tell you that it's not real, that it's not happening. Validation is a really huge part of the reparations process. And so a huge quote that I have here is that justice isn't fair, it's right. I say this a lot because in short, if we actually are prioritizing and centering Blackness as part of this conversation, if we are prioritizing and centering justice, it's going to feel unfair to the folks who have benefited from the death and oppression of Black people, okay? And one thing that I like to live off of that I say live off of because I find so much joy in it, but being able to validate Black experiences. And so one way I did that was with a exhibition called Umbra, which is mentioned in my bio. And it's really about the intersectionality of being a Black woman. And I use, minimal and gritty illustration style to be able to tell the issues that Black women have to deal with every day. So I use it as a tool of validation for Black women, but also as an educational purpose for non-Black people or non-Black women and persons. And the exhibition is broken up into 6 categories. I talk about these 6 things using 2 illustrations each. So I talk about gaze, I talk about control, being the savior. We have a lot of weight that we're carrying, danger and anger, burden, liberation. Not only do I have illustrations, and you can view more of this on umbraexhibit.com, but then I also have interactive pieces. I feel like it's a really important process that if we're trying to educate, that we not only have like the visual piece or the audio piece, but we have something tangible that folks can hold on to. And so you'll see that within the 6 themes that I have in this exhibition. So when I talk about gaze, which is about, kind of being in this space where you're the only Black person and all of these white folks are looking at you, not only do I have an illustration about that, but then also there's you put on these 3D goggles and you view this YouTube video that has my white allies and my white friends looking at a 360 camera, and you really start to feel the uncomfortability of being a Black woman in some of these spaces. And so you'll see more of that, on the website. Through the exhibition, as you walk through, you see descriptions of everything, and they're separated in 2 different ways. One is for Black women and the other one is for everybody else. And so Black women, I get to talk to them in a validating way. And for everybody else, I'm like, here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to stop doing. Here's what it's like to be us. Same thing with the zine that I created for the show. The zine on one side has Black women. You're able to interact with it. They're able to write in it. They're able to like share and put down their own stories. On the other side is everybody else. They just get to listen. They get to read. They get to see, what I'm talking about, but there is no real interaction. And again, there's a distinction there. And because we're talking about justice, you don't get to interact with it, but you do need to understand the experiences that we go through so you don't perpetuate them. And so, they go through the exhibition in this way with the 2 descriptions. It was really a beautiful experience because being in Duluth, the years that I was in Duluth, I just moved here in St. Paul at the beginning of August, but Duluth is like 91% white. And so being able to bring out all of these Black women to this show and being able to validate them was like one of the best experiences in my life. But again, I think that it brought out, like it really pushed that reparations agenda where I'm really pushing into healing and what does it look like to protect and to validate Black women's voices. And lastly is design, okay? Design for liberation. What does that look like? Design for liberation looks like it's trauma informed, right? It looks like it's supporting the Black people who are already doing the work. Oftentimes we go in there, and I think I've said this before, but oftentimes we go into spaces like, I'm a designer, I can tell you how it needs to be done or how it needs to work, but that's not how we should be going at it all, right? Black people have been doing the work and have continually done the work for a long time, and we need to just be supporting them in the resources that we have. Designing for liberation also looks like shifting, resources and then reimagining what our industry and our education systems look like. So I want to open up this section talking with a quote from my good friend, an amazing designer, amazing Black woman, Antoinette Carroll. And she says, like all systems, systems of oppression, inequality, and inequity are by design. Therefore, they can be redesigned. I absolutely believe this. Okay, so when I think about things, I think about designing for liberation. I use the design research process. I did shift it just a bit with my co-collaborator, Lisa Mercer, out of the University of Illinois. But when we talk about, the design research process, most of the time you see empathy. And we've scratched that out and put context. The reason why we've done this is because, yes, while we would love everyone to start designing because they have empathy for the issues that Black people face, if we waited for that, nothing would happen. Okay. If we waited for everyone to get on the level where they're like, oh, I need to picture that as like my daughter being killed. If we were waiting for that, then we couldn't actually move forward. We couldn't progress, right? And so we crossed that out and we put context, because all we need you to do as a designer is contextualize. If you don't understand something fully, if you're not going to have full empathy because you're not there yet, that's okay. Work with the communities who are already doing the work. That's the same thing that goes for like when people, professors and educators come to me and say, oh, I'm not able to talk about racism in my classroom. If we waited until every white person, and I'm talking about white people in this instance, understanding racism to the fullest before they're able to teach it, we will never start teaching it. And so it's important for us to just start to contextualize the racialized design. Secondly, moving to the define phase, begin to do your research, begin to do your secondary research, do your interviews, do your focus groups, and more importantly, be within the community to help you to begin to define what the actual issues are the community is telling you about. Thirdly, ideate. We want folks to be able to move into the idea process. And again, this should be co-created with community. Fourth, prototyping, right? We know about this. You have to begin to prototype, actually creating the thing that you said you were going to in the ideation phase. And then lastly, that last step in the design thinking process is test. We're not testing anything here. We're measuring the impact of what we've created to make sure that we are still looking in a holistic anti-racist lens. And that's why we renamed it Impact. So the framework that I was talking about is called Racism Untaught. Racism Untaught gives educators and organizations tools to identify racialized design. And we use the design research process to assist in cultivating anti-racist concepts in project-based learning environments. How we've broken down design so that folks understand it more clearly is in 3 different categories. It seems like I use 3 a lot, but in 3 different categories. The first one being artifacts. We all know what those things are. They're the Confederate statues, right? They're the racist Gucci blackface sweater. They're Aunt Jemima packaging, the things that we can actually tangibly hold, those artifacts, those objects. That's what those are. The second category being systems. Systems, exist all around us. We can't help but be in it. One of the examples that I have right here is a bridge that was designed by Robert Moses, who is like one of the godfathers of architecture, who was also one of the most racist and sexist individuals, described by many of his colleagues that way. And so what Robert Moses's designed systems did was have bridges that were too low so that folks who took public transportation weren't able to actually get to certain parts of the city. And I think I don't even have to connect the dots for you to tell you why that's an issue. Folks who have lower income most are going to be riding the bus. And a lot of times folks who have lower income are going to be people of color, Black people, Indigenous people. And so that's what makes that problematic. And then we have experiences. You know, I have a little illustration up here of an experience that's listed on our archive page on Racism Untaught. But, you know, it's a personal experience that happened when a white man, you know, mistook me for an employee, but none of the employees in this office were Black. And you can see more about it on the website. But I just want to let folks know and understand that like all of these artifacts, systems, and experiences are designed. They are all designed and set up this way by either, you know, societal implications or actual structures, or like this Gucci blackface sweater, you know, it went through so many hands hands before it got up onto the website, right? So the structure, that framework, again, I just want to show it to you in a visual format here, is that it is a linear process. However, we have these like kind of dotted lines because oftentimes when you get to the ideation phase, you realize, I don't understand that as well as I thought. So I'm going to have to go back to define or go back to context. So that happens often. And we want folks to understand how it can be cyclical. Within our framework as well, we also talk about the levels of oppression. These levels of oppression start with, personal beliefs. They move out into taking your personal belief and moving them into agentic action, right? So the way that you are interpersonally in relationship. And then those move out into being supported by our institutions. So our policies, our laws, practices, things that are support that. And then culturally, right? What does culture is the thing that shifts all three of those: institutional, agentic, and personal beliefs. So all of those things are supported by culture and inside of that cultural circle there. The toolkit itself consists of a huge workboard, 30 by 60 inches, and folks can work through this. It looks really amazing when folks are done working on a project, and they consist of cards. And what we've done here is created cards that are going to help people brainstorm. In that first step, because we are talking about racism, we have elements of racism. So we have things like implicit bias. We have things like microaggression, racial gaslighting, redlining. We have close to 50 cards now within just the racism category in context to help folks further understand that. And then they move through these different steps, define, using methods and theories to help them better understand the context, ideation. We have all of these sets of cards that help folks move through the toolkit. And again, you can learn more about this at racismuntaught.com. But we do workshops around this. It helps folks understand, looking at things through an anti-racist lens. And I wouldn't say even more importantly, but a really important piece of this has been able to bring this into the classroom to help students understand how to create things in an anti-racist way. And so I show a photo of students working on it here from a couple of semesters ago, working through the Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's, which I don't know if anyone has been up on the news, but Aunt Jemima is rebranding, and also Uncle Ben's just announced that as well. And just pay attention to their apologies. I just will say that. But what my students ended up creating was not just an apology that gets posted on social media, but they were like, how can we take that apology and bring it into the actual package design itself? And so, I love telling jokes, and I feel like this was like a great way to be like, haha, this is actually a thing that maybe Aunt Jemima might say. And so removing her face, removing that racist archetype, but then apologizing for it on the transition packaging. And they even went as far to say, okay, not only are we creating this transition packaging, but we're actually going to also create a system of reparations for that. So all of the funds that we get from any package sold within this packaging, that's going to go back to the family of Nancy Green, who is the archetype that they use to create the character Aunt Jemima. And then we're going to move into brand new packaging, removing Aunt Jemima's name altogether, because it's not a Black woman in the kitchen cooking for you. It is yours truly, right? You. So I thought this is a good 15 weeks project that they were able to work through, I think, very successfully. This semester, I'm teaching another packaging course, and these are the brands that I'm having my students look at. And so that'll be up on the website once those are completed, but I thought I might show that to just kind of give people a little bit of excitement. So again, we're still, talking about design, and the last project I just want to talk about for today is Project Natural, which is like my baby. I've been researching and creating this project. It's been ongoing since 2015. And what this project is about educating, connecting and empowering Black women around natural hair and self-identity. Again, also you'll see nodes of, that reparations process, which is that healing and validation, right? And so first I started with my own experience. This is kind of a system of ecology map. I don't expect anyone to be able to read any of this, but I just wanted folks to know how I began to analyze what my personal thinking was, and then how all of those different levels were affecting my thoughts around my skin, around my hair, all of those things. When I look back at the whole process, I look at like historically what hairstyles, folks from Western Africa, the Western region of Africa would be wearing. And I think about, being brought over during the system of slavery, how it was designed to like basically take away the time that Black women had to do their hair. You take away that communion aspect, and then you also just like give them either a wig or shave their head, but you don't give them access to the same materials that they had to do their hair. And so really this whole project, I think, is kind of working off how then do we heal from that. So I like to show this here, like kind of showing like these different areas in which we begin to transition to. But this is a postcard here on the left. This is a postcard that shows Black women still wearing a scarf on her head. And I think that just is a good reflection of, you know, that the era, but then also how design just reflected, or how art reflected what was happening, that Black women weren't really doing their hair. They didn't have time for that. And you start to see, you know, how we move from, you know, just from the that era all the way into like the 60s, where natural hair began to be, you know, this thing of empowerment. And then we move into today's time where, you know, people just really want to be natural and be healthy, right? So I moved into that whole process. Remember, this is kind of like the contextual phase. And then I moved into define, which is I did like observations at natural hair salons. I did graffiti walls, you know, really trying to understand what people's opinions were about their natural hair. I moved into doing concepts and creating my thesis question, really just to begin to understand what can I create that's going to help empower and educate and bring women together in a community to begin to learn about their natural hair. And so the outcomes of this project ended up being a huge poster display, interactive at that. So not only do I have these beautiful posters here, but then you'll see on that back wall in this photo here that they got to write their own quotes, which is again part of that validation process. Each year that I did the project, I would add more and more posters. I'm up to 30 posters now. And so the hair texture is actually made from something that's natural. So the first one I did was feathers. These ones are leaves. And each time that I did the exhibition, it grew, it transformed, it continued to get more and more communal. So I did like a huge symposium, had guest speakers, more and more posters, as you can see back there, can barely fit on the wall. Workshops, bringing Black girls into the conversation now, and not just Black women. So being able to create exercises that help them either learn how to braid, do their own hair, validate themselves and their identity. And then again, adding more posters, right? Adding those experiences to the wall so they can begin to see those. So those are what some of those look like. And I want to end, you know, this talk as I'm talking about design with some Black joy. So I just want to show you all a video of this project when it came, you know, to its full self, I think, in 2018. All right, Black joy, I love to see it. I know you do too. So I just want to leave you with this final question. How are you designing for liberation? Are you an abolitionist yet? Are you supporting systems of reparations? And are you designing through an anti-racist lens? I want to thank you all so much tonight for listening to me, and I hope that we're able to connect on another platform. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Teresa. This is amazing. We're going to go ahead and segue into Q&A. So yeah, go ahead and unshare your screen there. I want to first, before we even start diving into questions, I'm going to selfishly talk for a second. In that I just loved, I loved your entire presentation, but especially all the work you did with Project Natural. Embracing my own natural hair is something I've been struggling with over the past like few years and everything. and even like, you know, when I'm not running a whole, you know, virtual conference and stuff like that, I usually do wear it natural, but there's still, you know, that struggle of like, of it not, you know, seeming or looking professional to other people and stuff. I feel like when even if I'm in, you know, full, you know, twist out mode, I'll like, oh, I got an interview, let me straighten this out real quick so I don't frighten people away or something like that. So I just wanted to say that conversation and that, and the work you're doing, that was just so important for people to be able to embrace and love the hair that, you know, that we were given and not feel like we have to conform. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, you know, I hope, like, I was supposed to be planning another symposium this year, but then COVID. So please look out for something year after next. But I am very excited to continue the project because I just think it's so important, especially like those little girls. I wish I had something like that when I was growing up, because the validation that I was receiving was that it is ugly, you know, that like it's unruly or like it's too black, you know. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Awesome. Well, okay, now we're going to look at some of the questions that people have come in with. I can go ahead and start us off, and then Vanessa, you can chime in for the next one. So the first question we've got is from Steve, and I think he was talking about some of the work you've done earlier on in the slides, but he's asking, what are you using to create your designs? Are you creating your own fonts or manipulating pre-existing fonts?
Oh, you're probably talking about Juneteenth, the Juneteenth Floyd March. I create my own. Okay. I should be creating a font, but that's not really my forte. So I just literally will hand create each letter. Like you will literally see all the letter A, B, C, like me. I have done them in illustration form. And then each time I create a design, I like put it together the way that I want it to look. So there is no, like for me, because I'm trying to emphasize in my design, I'm trying to emphasize the quickness. Like, you know, when something happens, like somebody shot, like boom, you have to like create something. And that's what I try to like show in my design, is that like this activism, it's like gritty, it's quick. So I try to show that, even though it's not quick to make it. I do try, that's the idea behind, the inspiration behind the type. So that's all hand illustrated.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I was really curious about that too when I was looking at it. I'm like, what's she doing over there? Putting all this stuff together. So, Vanessa, do you want to go ahead and read the next question we've got?
Absolutely. So we have a couple questions here from Steve. So the next one he has is, who are your design heroes and where do you get your inspiration?
Emory Douglas. Emory Douglas is my design hero. I met him, I brought him to the University of Minnesota Duluth last year, and it was like the best day of my life. Like I really have been, struggling to, one, find Black designers that I can look up to, but two, find Black designers who are activists and organizers as well as designers. And Emory emulates that throughout all of his work. So that is my design hero for sure. And meeting him was so cool. He was like this down to earth brother. Like we just had good conversation. I just loved it. And like, I still keep in touch. And so it was really just awesome. But Emory Douglas for sure is number one.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a deep dive when we go do a heavy amount of creeping afterwards.
Yes.
On it, whatever. They sound pretty incredible. So let's see, we're gonna ask one more question from Steve and then we'll move on to the other ones we've got here in the chat. So Steve says you were like pure energy, lightning hitting asphalt. I was like, where does that come from? Where do you get that energy and around, the things you're talking about? Where does that come from?
Yes. Well, first, I'm a Sagittarius. So that is the energy that you see on the screen. But no, I'm excited about this work. I'm excited about the potential. Like, yes, I feel down a lot because of the things that are happening, but I'm excited about using my craft, in that social change ecosystem, knowing where I fall and being able to use that for good. So I'm excited to tell folks that no, it's not always fun, but like I have fun talking about when I get through the hard things to show like, this is what we accomplished. 2,500 people were out there signing the petition that we created to like defund this and that, so like, I feel excited about the work because I feel like I'm really making a difference and it just makes me feel whole. So that's the excitement, is making change.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that. I feel like when you find the work that you're really, really passionate for, I feel like no matter what is going on in the world, especially in 2020, where nothing is going pretty great at all right now. It's really important to be able to hold on to that stuff that kind of keeps you moving. I feel like nothing else, without it, it's like you wouldn't be able to keep going the way you are.
Absolutely.
All right, Vanessa, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes. All right. So we have a question from Anna, and she says, what do you think the role of POC, Asian, etc., is within discussion of institutionalized racism in the US?
Your position is the same position mine is, to be honest. Like, I think that there is no way that you need to be removed from the conversation. You need to be all up in it. Supporting, again, I think what my main focus is that you're supporting things that are already happening, and not trying to go in there and make, whatever, make something that's like completely brand new. I think the folks need to be supporting the organizing that has been happening, like post-slavery and on, rather than trying to create something new. So I think that's where people might get it kind of messed up. I think that there needs to be conversations in non-Black communities about anti-Blackness. So I will say, if that's not happening in the spaces that you're in, say, you're a part of an Asian affinity group, make sure that you're having those conversations. Same way that in my community spaces, when I said that land acknowledgement and I said that I'm advocating for Indigenous sovereignty, we're having those conversations in the Black community about what does it look like for stolen land and stolen people to be working together for Indigenous sovereignty and for Black liberation. So I think it's important that when you start to get to those levels, that you make those bridges about oppression, but then you're able to bring those hard conversations into the mix. So when I think about non-Black people, I think, are we having conversations about anti-Black racism within your communities? And are you supporting the work that's already happening out there? So those are kind of the two major points that I think about with the answer to that question.
Cool. All right, I'm going to move to the next. I'm going to skip one and we'll come back to it, because I think that it kind of, somewhat is in the same train of thought. Well, not same, but, anyway, I'll just say it. So we have a question from Kat. She's like, how do you suggest that white women or white people in general get set up in this kind of work, especially in the design and impact facilitation field, where the representation of BIPOC people can be lacking or is lacking? She's like, I feel that there is always a fear of stepping on toes or speaking on behalf of other people or worse.
Yes. So if you all have time, I would make sure to go and look up the State of Black Design. It was a panel that happened last Friday. It had amazing Black designers on it, not just myself, but other people were on it. But on that panel, we talk about that. We talk about that a lot. But I will say for sure that introspective piece is super, super important. Finding out where you are at, not only in that social change ecosystem, but what is your personality types? I do all of this. I love personality tests because it helps me to understand I'm an extrovert, and I got a comment already on the energy. My energy is loud. So how do I make sure that people who are not going to come to that space with that same energy, how do I need to be in that space to allow room for them, to be vulnerable, to talk and all that, right? I also think it's important for white folks to not try to get their people of color colleagues, their Black, Indigenous, and people of color colleagues to teach them, racism, and teach them how to, navigate this and what they need to do. I think that there are white spaces that are dedicated to that. For me, I always talk about organizations like SURJ. It's SURJ, Standing Up for Racial Justice. It's literally white people who are working on anti-racism. And there are two streams I think that need to happen with that. Is you need to do the personal work, that whole white guilt, white shame, all that is stuff that's natural. You're going to have to work through, right? But then also at the same time, you're going to have to show up for Black people. And so that's a really hard thing that, I think, is we're asking, what needs to be asked. I don't even want to say we're asking a lot, but there's those two tracks that need to be happening. You need to be reading the books. You need to be joining the book clubs, talking about how to be an anti-racist, all of those, white fragility, all of those books are great, but then also show up for Black people. Because we don't need you at home just reading a book. We need you showing up. And if you get cussed out by a Black person, show up again, show up. I think people are so afraid to make mistakes and be called racist. And it's just like, it's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes, I think about that when I'm showing up for other communities myself. I'm not trans, but I want to show up for trans people, right? And I can't just sit at home and read books and think that's doing something, because it's not. So 2 tracks: interwork, show up for Black people.
2 very great points, and thank you so much for diving into that and explaining that. I'm going to selfishly jump in with my own little question in between. So earlier in a talk this morning, we were talking about following more, Black and BIPOC, designers, and following more Black news sources and things like that. Do you have any recommendations for our audience on, designers that we should, be paying attention to, that we should be sharing their work and things like that? Obviously you, of course, but in addition to you.
Yes, there's me. There is a ton of people, right? I think about, first off, State of Black Design. Search it on your Google right now. All of those people that were on that panel, you need to be following, period. I think about my friend Antoinette, who I quoted in the thing here. Antoinette doing amazing things. Antoinette Carroll. Please make sure you're following her. I think about Jennifer White. Please follow, doing a lot of stuff around Black disability rights, all of that. Please follow her. I think about Jacinda Walker. I think about, so there's just so many people to think about. Cheryl D. Miller, another, designer who's amazing. So I would say for sure, start at that list. And then once you start following those people, how you get suggestions, just go ahead and click yes. Just go ahead. Yes, I will follow you. And I think then you'll start to get into this hole of influence of people that I think will really begin to open your mind to some things. But those are the people I think of offhand.
Thank you. Vanessa, do you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, I'm actually going to go ahead and jump in with a question from Nick. He asks, how do you think people can get engaged in these causes more when a lot of concerns are high with joining protests due to the current situation with COVID?
This is an interesting question. And I get this kind of a lot because how I show up in the social change ecosystem is I'm a disruptor. So yes, I want to show up at the protests. In that social change ecosystem, there are so many ways to show up. And I think that people only think that social justice is about being out there with your fists raised, cussing out the cops. That is not the role of everyone in this movement, period. We need people writing grants. We need people writing policies that we're going to submit over to the city council. We need people who are showing up in so many other ways. And so yes, people see, again, it's people see the glam of protests, and they don't see all the work that went behind it. I would have loved to have just the people who were over here getting funders to help me raise it, but I was organizing all of it, showing up and also fundraising and all this. And so we need people doing a whole bunch of other things. So I think don't focus on just that part there where it's okay, I don't feel comfortable being outside in COVID. Understandable, totally understandable. Can you be making calls to whoever you need to make calls to our government? Can you be making calls to Senate people? Can you be making calls to city council members, to mayors? So there's so many other ways in which we need folks to show up in the movement. And that's why I say that introspective piece is so important, because you need to find out what feeds you in this work so that you can show up as your best self in the social change ecosystem.
That is so true. I think we were talking about this earlier about, everyone needs to find their own lane within the revolution. You have to figure out, what works for you and what you're passionate for and how you can kind of continue to move forward. So there's definitely different parts of it. I mean, reading books is important, but then also, actually, figure out which ways feel most comfortable to you in order to, put it in the work. If it's calling people, emailing people, if it's going to a protest, figure out what works for you. But I think there's definitely more than one way for people to be involved, for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, let me jump to another question. I'm going to jump to a question from Rosanna. She's asking, Teresa, how do you take care of yourself? What is your fave self-care things?
Roller skating. I love roller skating, y'all. I'm gonna go roller skating after I get off of this Zoom call right now. That is my thing. And the thing is, like, I feel like I kept getting this question all the time when I would do talks the past few years. They're like, how do you do self-care? Like, you do so many things, self-care. And I would just be like, I don't have time for it. I don't have time for it. And now I really make time for it. So, I roller skate like 3 or 4 times a week. But that is my thing, because like the wind is just blowing and like I'm just on these wheels, I'm dancing. I got my music playing. So like that is really the way in which I do self-care. Also, I get my nails done. That's another form of self-care for me. But yes, roller skating is like my number one. Like it's my workout, and then also my way where I can't have my laptop in front of me. And I would encourage folks who are looking for that self-care, what can you do that's away from work? And for me, being on my laptop is part of my work. So how do I get outside? How do I get out of my element and do something completely new? So roller skating is it. So if y'all want to buy me some roller skate gear, my Venmo is on my website. No, I'm kidding. But
That's awesome. All right, I have another question from Kat, less on topic, but will you be getting more apparel inventory on your website?
oh my gosh. We're working on some new stuff. I will have to say, like, we usually release something every summer, but this summer has just been, it's been a lot. I mean, you were there. So but yes, we're working on some new things, some things that are in the works for sure. But what we got there is what we got. So I hope you can find something, that works for you. And if not, usually we have the apparel design within like a sticker or a button or a poster. So you can also purchase that same design on another type of piece of inventory.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out and make sure get some of what's going on there before everything sells out. I feel like everyone's gonna be running over there after this. We have a question from Steve asking if you have ever read the book of War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
No, I have not. And it's like I can't even have a follow-up question to that, because like I have not read it. I'm so sorry. No, that's the answer.
That's totally fine. I figured that's gonna go. It's a little harder, like we don't have everybody here on the call, so you can't be like, oh, what is it about?
Yeah, I can't follow up with the person. Yeah.
What's going on? So I have another question. So with all of this great work that you've done with Project Natural and stuff, what advice do you have for any Black women listening to this talk about embracing their natural hair, especially in maybe a professional setting like the workplace?
That's a hard one, right? Because we still live in a white supremacist culture that doesn't value what we bring to the table as Black women in general, and then let alone as a Black woman with natural hair, because you're like seen as even louder, right? And so all I could say really, I think, is the biggest piece of doing Project Natural that I have learned is yes, it's important to like learn the educational stuff around like, what products do I use, hair porosity, like all of these types of things. But the biggest thing has been community. And I will say, like, really finding like the community that's going to support you, and that looking at that reparations piece that I was talking about, that validation is more important than like every day that goes by. It's so much more important to make sure that like, am I going crazy? Like, didn't they just do this thing that perpetuated racism? And being able to talk about that with a community of people is so important. So I will say, like, and that could be really for anybody, but like I would really say that for Black women is like the community piece. That's what I've heard constantly over and over has been the way that they're like able to deal with, what goes on around their natural hair. And it's still a huge deal. And if you don't know about it, allies, folks who are not Black about natural hair, I would really encourage you to look up what Black women have to go through around that issue. But community is the biggest piece, I'll say. Like, keep in touch, Ashton, like that, keep in touch.
Yes, I definitely will. Oh, you better be looking for a LinkedIn request and some follow requests that are coming on after this. I just want to be creepy ahead of time. We did have one other question from Ashley. She's asking, what are you working on next, if you even have time?
So, I'm getting my PhD, y'all. And it is the coolest experience. It's just like, in class, we're having conversations about like land acknowledgements and like, what does that mean? And like, pronouns, are we, lip service. It's so cool. So I'm doing that right now. Blackbird Revolt is going to release a new zine in the next couple of weeks. I say next couple of weeks, but it actually might be next week. But we're going to release a new zine. So that's something that we've been working on. And that will be out. Again, it'll be free. It'll be a free resource for folks. But that's something that we're working on. And then to be honest, Racism Untaught is really taking off right now. We've done a lot of huge corporative, that was a weird way of saying that word, but we've done a lot of corporations in this past summer. And again, I think that has something to do with the uprisings and, movement for Black lives. But I'll say Racism Untaught is a really huge project that I'm working on right now. Right now, I'm really focused on creating that workbook, creating the toolkit in a way that people can just purchase it and take all of this material home and be able to work through it themselves rather than us being facilitators and needing to be in the space to explain things. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. So I guess that answers the question. Like I got a lot of stuff in the works right now.
That's awesome. I know we all can't wait to see how all that plays out and everything comes to fruition. We do still have some more questions, but we are at time. So I'll collect whatever questions we didn't get a chance to get to, and I'll send them to you. And if you want to respond, you can. No pressure or anything like that, but I'll go ahead and send them your way so that at least you know what they were.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much to everybody in our audience for joining us today. Before we leave, I want to give another shout out to all of our sponsors from Midwest Design Week. Without this would not have been possible. And thank you again to our amazing keynote presenter, Terresa Moses. Thank you for sharing your energy and experience with us. I think it was a really great way for us to end this incredible week that we've had. And then I've got two quick announcements just before we officially close. First, I'd like to announce the winner of the Adobe Creative Suite, Grayson Perry. Looks like Grayson is a student of BGSU, so congratulations, and be on the lookout for an email from our team. That's thanks to our sponsors at Adobe. And then finally, there's an official Midwest Design Week survey in Slack, and we'll probably email it out to all of you as well, but make sure you fill it out so we can get your feedback on how everything went, any suggestions you have. It'll definitely help for if there's future Midwest Design Weeks or individually for our chapters for what events you guys want to see from us in the future. But thank you so much to everybody again for coming out all this week to all the different events we've had.